we've got one little picture here of some ne'er-do-wells who were original.
I put that up there because here's three guys that go way, way back, and we're all up in years now. And in the middle is Don Williams. You see me, of course, on the other side is Bob Cole, who fortunately is with us today. We're very happy you could be here, Bob. This is one of the last pictures taken of Don Williams. And we were over at the Black Hawk Museum to have lunch with Don. He was already having difficulty, but Janet, his wife, made us lunch, and he was able to join us. And his mind was still good, but he was really having difficulty moving, and we tell war stories and get faster and more dangerous every year. But I wanted to put this up there because this goes way back, and there are a number of you in the room today that go back to this day too. And Don is unfortunately no longer with us. He was a major key part in the cartoon.
There was somebody up here earlier who started attending Capellini's in San Francisco.
Capellini's.
Went to.
Now, how many went to Capellini's?
There's one now. Yeah.
Quite a few. Yeah, we're good.
We should have an award for that. Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Next.
Okay, now we get into it. Mike's going to keep me moving here. Quite a ride with Ed Gilbertson, My Life on Wheels and Other Thrills. That also happens to be the title of my upcoming book. And so you can consider this kind of a pre-publication interview regarding my book.
Coming to a bookstore near you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be out in the next few months.
This will be pretty cool. His publisher phoned and said, okay, I've read it, it works, now we'll put it together.
Yep.
So it's on the road. All right. So that, what is that, Ed?
Well, that's where I was born. Devil's Lake, North Dakota, way out in the middle of nowhere. Few people have been to North Dakota. Anybody here ever been to Devil's Lake? Probably not. It sits on the edge of a Sioux Indian reservation. In fact, my grandfather traded with the Sioux. And this is a picture as it was back in the 30s, about the time I was born. And it's still a small town in the middle of nowhere. But that's where it all started. That's a picture of my parents when they got married. That was on the day they got married. And pretty good looking and very happy couple. You'd think that it was really going to be a good marriage. It turned out not so good. My father couldn't handle alcohol. He became an addict, and he was not a fun drunk. He was a mean drunk. And it didn't work out well at all. Got like hell for my mother. And then my father winds up being murdered when I was 8. So I can remember my father from a very young age, but he left us very early and never found the killer, unfortunately. And unfortunately, both my grandfathers died just before I was born. My grandfather on my mother's side was in World War I. He died in the flu epidemic of 1918. My grandfather Gilbertson, who was really looking forward to having a grandson, died just 9 days before I was born. So I never got to know my grandfathers or my father other than as a very young child.
So this sounds sad. On the other hand, well, Ed recovered at age. How old were you when that happened?
I was 11 years old here, and that was my first car. My mother and father got divorced before he was killed, and she moved to Fargo, which is where my grandmother lived, and we lived there. And my mother wound up marrying a fellow by the name of Floyd Nine. Well, I liked cars as a kid. I started playing with them in the sandbox and building little models and scooters and that kind of thing. And it turned out that my stepfather had an auto body repair shop. And that worked out very well because I had space to work on things, I had the tools, and the first car I built was this one right here, 1948, at 11 years old, and that's me looking pretty proud of this car. It's rough, I built it myself, and I participated in the Derby for 3 years, and then, as I recall, when you got to be 16, you were no longer eligible.
Apparently, one of the lessons that I understand that you learned is that, yes, there are rules. And the rules for soapbox derby stuff says the kid has to build the car.
That's correct.
Right? You can't just bring a guy in. Well, it turned out that most of the other cars had brought a guy in. And so from then on, which direction did you go? Cheater or rule?
No, I was very upset. I really was, because you can tell this car is pretty rough built, and I did it all myself. And you weren't supposed to use power tools, and so I didn't use power tools. I used and it really took some doing as a young kid, but I managed to do it. And then I show up on the day of inspection before we head down the hill in the soapbox derby. And most of the cars had been built by their fathers, or other parties had been hired to build them, and I registered the protest. I said, this is not right. And of course, they paid little attention to me. Why does this kid keep complaining? Keep complaining because everybody else is cheating, for God's sake.
So he goes on, perhaps a little disillusioned, but at, I think it's age 11, you got your first motorcycle?
My first motorcycle, it was a motorized two-wheeler, but it was quite a contraption. It was a bicycle, the pedals had been removed, a plate had been welded right above where the pedals were, and a 1.5 horsepower brake and strap had been bolted to it. And it was quite a thing. You start the darn thing, you get it going because it had a lever with like a roller skate wheel on it, and a belt, the back wheel. And you get it started with a rope pull, so you know where you're pulling the rope. It didn't run when I got it, by the way. I finally got it running. That's where I began to learn about engines and how they work. So you leave that belt slack, you get that thing started, and then you pull back on the lever, tighten that belt, and you lurch forward. It was quite a contraption. I wanted to have a Harley Davidson someday because some of the older guys in the neighborhood had Harleys, and they were just back from World War II, and I said, oh wow, I want one of those. And so I kind of hung around the Harley shop, and the guys laughed, and they called my contraption Harley Davidson.
So he recovered himself at age, what was this, 13?
Well, this was 13, and I decided that I'd like to have a car. And of course, I'm living in far North Dakota, a small community, got away with things back in those days. If you got caught without a license, it's saying you need to stay in your own neighborhood. You know, get away with those things these days in places like far North Dakota. Well, I wanted to get a 32 or a 34 Ford Deuce, and that E34 with the heart-shaped grill. I couldn't afford one, so I found this thing that had been traded in. It had come off a farm. It was a wreck. It didn't run. But I only paid $50 for it. So my stepfather towed it back to the garage, and I had some space to work on it. And
Who did the body work?
well, I had learned how to work with a dolly and a hammer and take the things off for de-chroming and those sorts of things. Well, my stepfather, being in the auto repair business, he did the basic letting and shading, so he did a beautiful job. You can see there the rear deck is shaved. I put, those are 47 DeSoto bumpers, those nice ripple bumpers. It's got, the big deal then was Cadillac hubcaps, so it's got those nice Cadillac hubcaps. And that's a rear view. We've got, we showed the front, right?
We showed the front.
And then I hopped up the engine as best I could. You know, I was just a school, young kid in school, just entering high school. I had a couple of paper routes, and I sold ice cream bars and rig I pulled behind the bike. Sold them for 10 cents. I got a penny for each one I sold. Anyway, I cobbled together enough money, and I managed to up that engine a bit. It had a 3/4 cam in it that wore it out a bit. It had the double Stromberg 97s there, as you see. So that was my hot rod, my first hot rod.
And so what you can smell happening here is the early version of Rebel Without a Cause. But then he flipped back to the motorcycle thing.
Yes.
And that bike appeared at age, what, 19?
15.
15, for God's
So I
sake.
got my first Harley Davidson at 11. I got the clapped out Ford at 13. And I wanted to get a Harley. And this guy had this Harley, and it was really a great bike. I said, man, I want to have a bike like that someday. His name was Bob Schumann, and he was a vet. In fact, all the guys running on the bikes those days and getting together, they were World War II vets. They came back from the war, and they were still full of adrenaline. They didn't sit back in the civilian life too well. And so they formed these groups, and they had stripped down bikes. And Bob Schumann built this thing. They're a wonderful bike. And it's a classic bobber. That's the way we did it in the day. And this thing had those shotgun megaphone pipes. They were straight pipes. Oh, you can't believe how loud that thing was. I loved it. It had a suicide clutch. Bob decided he was going to come to California. We all wanted to get out to Southern California, and he was ready to go. Because we were seeing things in the magazine about all the great motorcycle and hot rod stuff taking place in L.A. And I said, are you taking the bike with you? And he said, I don't think so. I think when I get out there, I'll buy another bike. I said, I want that bike. He said, how the hell are you going to get that bike? Where are you going to get the money? I said, well, I got a couple of paper routes, and I'm selling these ice cream bars, and cleaning up the shop a little bit, and I get a little 50 cents, 75 cents every time I do that. Anyway, I said, don't sell it. He said, you're not going to get the money together. I said, hang on to it, don't sell it. And it took a while, but I managed to get the money together, and I went over to him and I said, I got the money for your bike. He said, like hell you do. I said, no, I'm ready to buy it. He said, you know how to ride a Harley? I said, well, you know, I've been riding my rig around. And he said, that Harley a Davidson? I said, well, I can ride it. He said, before I sell you this bike, I want to be sure you can ride it. So we took it out on the highway near the airport, and I think I rode my Harley Davidson out there, or I got around, maybe I took my car out, I don't remember. But I got on that bike. I'd never ridden a bike like that. This was a hot bike with a suicide clutch. And but I had been hanging around the Harley shop, and I watched these guys, the way they started the bikes and all that, so I thought I could do it. And so I get on the bike and said, okay, show me. And I said, God, please don't let me go down on this bike. And I managed to start it up okay, and I took off down the highway for a ways, and they said, oh wow, it's, you know, I'm doing it. and now I got to turn around. And I said, oh God, please, please God. I managed to turn around and I came back. He said, okay, you did. I said, here's your money. I said, but he said, the bike is yours. That's a great machine. I rode that bike by myself out to California because, like everybody else, I wanted to get to Southern California. And I had a lot of fun with that motorcycle. And when I went to come back to North Dakota because I was good for my sophomore year in college, I thought I might stay out there and go to USC. I got a job. I could have done it, I guess. But I had already started in the engineering school at North Dakota State, which was in Fargo. And so I decided that I would go back to school. Well, I'm not doing the same thing that Bob Schumann did. I thought, well, maybe I'll ride that bike back to Fargo. And I said, no, I love it, but I can get another one when I get there. So, gotta move. Anyway, another fellow bought it. He wanted it badly. He was glad to get it. I got on a Greyhound bus in 3 days. It was nice to get back to Fargo to start my sophomore year. Well, there it is. North Dakota State, Mechanical Engineering. I graduated in 1959. I was hired by Boeing. The idea at that time was that the Russians had sent up Sputnik, and word went out across the country from our government that those of you that are in the engineering schools, we want you to get involved in the missile field to the best extent you can. We got to catch up with the Russians. So all of a sudden the thing to do was to go to work for one of the defense contractors. I wound up being hired by Boeing in Seattle and working on the Minuteman missile, the guidance package, right? Vibration dynamics. And that was a good job. And but I was also had gone through ROTC and I had an active duty commitment. And so I was only there 3 months and I got called to active duty. I thought, well, crap, I like this job. But
let's go back to your first car, your first sports car when you graduated from motorcycles.
Yes. I never really left motorcycles, but, and I didn't know anything about sports cars. We only had, custom hot rod cars back in Fargo, no sports cars at all. I got out to Seattle and I began seeing sports cars. And I thought, well, that might be pretty neat. I was making a pretty good salary with Boeing. And so I found an Austin Healey, a 57 Austin Healey 106. It was only a couple of years old. Got it for a pretty good price, and I really liked that car. I owned it for quite a while. Healey's are great. I still like Healey's. Now, that's not my original Healey, because I have a lot of other cars along the way, and we'll show you pictures of some of those. But when I had all of my green cars, the vintage V12 Ferraris and Shelby 427 Cobra, I had some great cars, I really did. But I sold a car, and that leaves the garage space. You gotta fill the garage space, right? I said, well, I've had most of the cars I wanted. I'm gonna go back and try and find my first car, which was a Healey. Well, I didn't have any information on it. It was gonna be probably a fruitless search. So I found one just like it. Same model, same color. I got in that car and drove it, and it was just all came back to me. And it was close. I was willing to go a distance to get a car, just like my first sports car. But it turned out to be in Moraga, which was hop, skip, and a jump. And it was a very good car. Sherry named all her cars. She called this car Scamp, which was a good name for it. We had a lot of fun with it.
Let's sort of step back for a moment. Ed went to college courtesy of ROTC
Yes.
membership, an interesting club that some of you know about. And there were consequences to having taken their money. And that was, what, didn't you tell me, 3 months?
Yeah, I was only there 3 months, and then I got my orders to report for active duty, and I was ordered to report to March Air Force Base, Riverside, alongside Riverside Raceway. I said, well, that's kind of cool. And we didn't have any racetracks like that back in the Midwest. I'd heard about Riverside, and one of my barracks buddies, he said, there's going to be a race over at the track. You want to go? I'd never been to a race like that. So we went over there, and we're standing at the end of a long straight, and make a sharp turn and then roar off again. And I'd never seen these kind of cars. I had heard about Ferraris and road track magazines, things like that, but I'd never seen one, never heard of them. This turned out to be the 1959 LA Times Grand Prix. They had all the big drivers there, they had all the great cars there, and I heard those damn Ferraris come screaming by, and they slow down and they make that tight turn and scream off. I said, oh my God, that's unearthly. It sounds like they're from another planet. I'm going to have one of those someday. Well, I had my Austin Healey, and there was no way I could afford a Ferrari. It was the second lieutenant, mentioned second lieutenant. So I just kind of got hooked on it and said, someday I'm going to have one. But it was wonderful. I mean, Phil Hill was racing there. All the great drivers.
So that, like many of us, and somewhere in our teen age, we get something gets imprinted in there. And the theory is that David might know at exactly the year 15 years and 7 months, whatever's there is imprinted forever, and you're going to do it. And this was this is the moment when Ed got hooked on cars, but before he could implement his later mission in life.
This was afterward. Thank you for slowing me down, Mike. I was about to start reading the drivers of the cars over there. You could read about that. But no, what happened is I had wanted to be a fighter pilot when I went through ROTC. And in my sophomore and junior years, I had 20/20. I said, and I was doing pretty well, and I was kind of liked the military, I liked ROTC. And thought when I graduated, I'm going to go to flight school to become a fighter pilot. So we graduate, we get our final physical, and the best I can make is 2050. I said, what the hell's going on? And I took it 3 times, and they said to me, now they call me sir, I'm a newly minted second lieutenant. They said, sir, you've tried it 3 times. You're not going to make 20/20, but you can make 20/50, so you can be a navigator. I said, well, I hear what you're saying, but that means I'm going to be sitting behind the pilot, and I'm going to be on a bomber. So if I can't be up in the pilot position, I'll pass. And so I thought then that they would probably use me as an engineer, engineering specialty, reporting to Riverside. Well, when I got there, they said, we've got what we need right now in the way of engineers, but we need meteorologists. I said, really? They said, yeah. What we'll do, if you're interested, we will send you to UCLA. You'll be back in college again. We'll pay all the expenses, and you'll get another degree. I thought to myself, LA, where all the hot rods and motorcycles and circus are, yeah, I think I can do that. And so that's what I did. So I had that mechanical engineering degree, and then I got another degree in meteorology at UCLA. And then when I graduated there, you could state your preference for a base. Well, my first choice was Langley Air Force Base, which was the headquarters for the tactical fighter squadrons. And if I can't be a fighter pilot, I want to be around it. But I wasn't sure I did it. You gave us 3 choices. I got my first choice, and my first station was at Langley Field, Virginia. Headquarters for the Fighter Command, Tactical Air Command. And it really worked out pretty well because I pulled regular duty at the meteorology headquarters there, but then I got picked to go out with the fighter squadrons under exercises. And so the fighter planes would take off ahead of us, and we would follow the support troops. I was one of them. I was the meteorologist for the squadron going out and exercise. We'd follow them in C-130. And that was a lot of fun because I got along fine with those fighter pilots. I wanted to be one, and I can tell you, talk about a group that could raise hell. I thought those motorcycle guys were pretty wild. But I tell you, I don't know, have any of you been a fighter pilot? Because they work hard, believe me. You can imagine how hard they work when they're on duty and they have to fly these long missions cramped in a cockpit. And so when they come off duty, they're ready to relax, and they really have some great parties. And I got in on a lot of them.
So with those,
here's what happened and how I got to the missile program. So I'm a meteorologist. I'm working with the Tactical Air Command as a squadron weather officer, and I would even got picked, amazingly enough, to be the commanding general's briefing officer for his morning meeting, 4-star general, head of the Tactical Air Command. That really surprised me. That's what meeting. Anyway, the only thing is it took me away from going out and exercises because I had to be there for the morning briefings that the general had. And I said, I kind of like this, but I don't have the wings. And if you don't have the wings, you're only going to go so far in the Air Force. You can make it up to Curve, but you're not going to make general officer. And I was interested in making a career, but I knew that if I didn't have those wings, it's going to be tough. And so I said, I'll get as close as I can. So I put in for jump school at Fort Benning. Not that I like to jump out of airplanes, but you know, they're laid up on getting a higher rank at some point. And that can be dangerous business. If you go through that, you become a forward air controller, and you go someplace like Vietnam, and you get dropped in, you know, the enemy lines, and you guys hear the planes coming in. So, you know, what you call a fun job is a very dangerous job. But I was willing to do it to enhance my resume, so to speak. And just as I was about to go down to Fort Benning for jump school, the Strategic Air Command formed an Intercontinental Ballistic Service, and they put out the word that they would like to have some officers volunteer for missile duty. And if you get selected, you'll get a special badge, a pocket rocket. You can see it up there on my breast pocket. And the story was that this is a new and very important part of the mission. And if you get through the program and you're accepted and you become a missile launch officer, that pocket rocket will put you in good stead. It'll put you right up there with the wings. Well, that never happened. Even today, to get very far in the Air Force, you've got to have the wings. And so the missile badge wasn't going to do it, but at the time I thought it might. So I put in for it, and I got selected. So I said, well, I'll be damned. So I went to Chinook Air Force Base in Illinois, and I took missile training. Of course, that was a breeze, because I was going to become a Minuteman missile launch officer, and I'd worked on the Minuteman at Boeing. I already knew all about the Minuteman, so that training course was Breeze, and they then transferred to Great Falls, Montana, Nelson Air Force Base, where they had quite a few Minuteman missiles. There were 10 around each
Close to Lister.
Oh, okay.
How far down in the earth are you here?
Yeah, what we do, I've tried to keep this brief. As you see, I have a hard time once I start talking. Anyway, I wind up at Maelstrom Air Force Base as a missile launch officer. And to answer the question, the Launch Control Center was 100 feet underground. You went down in an elevator and then you were locked in for as long as you're going to be on duty. You are surrounded by 10 silos, each one holding a Minuteman missile with hydrogen warhead. So, and just one of those could do a lot of damage. And there I am. I'm sitting at my console. The fellow in the background is Captain Rogers. He was my teammate. And everything you did together. And if you ever had to launch, you had to turn your keys together, and the keys were too far apart for one person to reach them. And we were also armed, and we were told that if our crewmate ever made a false move, we were to shoot. So we always had a loaded gun with us. It was pretty important duty, that's for sure. Because here I am, I'm in my 20s. I'm sitting on top of 10 hydrogen warheads. And then the Cuban Missile, is there a slide coming up there?
No.
Okay. Then the Cuban Missile Crisis comes along. And for those of you that were around, you remember that very clearly. For those of you that weren't, you probably know of it or heard of it. It was when Khrushchev took the position that he was going to install Russian missile sites in Cuba, not that far off our mainland. President Kennedy decided that no, that can't be done. We're not going to allow the Russians to put their missiles in Cuba. And Khrushchev said he was going to do it anyway. And so these missiles were loaded on Russian ships, and they were going to head for Cuba. And President Kennedy, he did draw a red line. I mean, we've got people drawing red lines in Washington today, except for Keith Booth. No, Kennedy, he had guts. He didn't budge. He drew a red line off the coast of Cuba. He said, "You cross that, we're declaring war." He was serious. And so, as those Russian ships headed toward Cuba, Strategic Air Command, well, all the commands went on full alert duty, and they selected a number of the missile launch crews to go out to the launch sites and just stay there. They said, you two have been selected as one of the few crews to go out and get into your launch control center. Don't say anything to anybody. You don't know when you're coming back. Jump on the helicopter and go. And so we had all kinds of high-frequency radio gear in the capsule. We could tune in to these all over the world. And
Tell us how many years you lasted down there in the bowels of the earth.
well, it was about 3 years. But what happened on this occasion? So Dan and I are sitting like this, and we're listening to those Russian ships and getting news reports, and they're getting closer and closer and closer. Now, when we're down there, like in all of the military, you're constantly going through exercises. And we got our orders from a airborne B-52, and it was called Skybird. And Skybird were launched out of Omaha, the headquarters for the Strategic Air Command. And so the klaxon goes off, tells us where to come to attention. We had different passcodes each day. We knew how to decode them, so we decode them. Okay, the passwords are valid. We've done this 1,000 times. We start going through the sequence. Well, always in the past, you reach a certain sequence, Let's say, flashing goes, say, stand down, this is an exercise. Well, we got up to that point and they kept going. And we thought, oh my God. And all of a sudden we're staring at the lump switches. And there's toggle switches, right? One for each of the hydrogen warhead missiles. And Dan looks over at me and he said, Ed, I think this is it. I said, I think you're probably right. And those ships got right up against that red line, and we're sitting there staring at switches. All we have to do is boom, right? And you're sending hydrogen warheads toward the enemy, and they do a lot of damage. And of course, they probably be sending some of them toward us also. So it's very serious. And right at the last minute, people never realized how close we came to actually going to war, nuclear war. He said, stand down. And we heard over the radio gear that Khrushchev had stopped at the last minute. That close. People, when I tell that story, people sometimes say, well, if you had gotten the order to fire, would you have done it? Yeah, we would have. Because in the military, you go through exercises very deliberately. So many times, over and over again, it always becomes automatic, and that's what they want. If you're given the order to do something like that, you're going to do it. So I say with all honesty, and Dan felt the same way. Yeah, we'd have done it.
So, having lived through that pretty exciting moment, I'm sure, it turns out he has not lost his youthful motorcycle thing.
I've not lost my interest in motorcycles.
And so this was, were you 29, do I recall?
I was 29. The first one you saw, that great 47 knucklehead with shotgun megaphone on it, I was 15. This is later in my motorcycle life. I was 29, hadn't joined the club yet. That's a special Liberty Edition shovelhead Harley. Richard Deal now owns this bike. He kept it for a very long time. We rode the bike just like that, back and forth to Sturgis, 4,000-mile round trip. No windshield, no protection. Sherry sitting on a hard leather pillion pad bolted in the back fender, all the way over and all the way back, sleeping alongside the road. He did that a lot. He's a real trooper. Anyway, I thought you might be interested in that because it shows you big, and I'm still young and in pretty good shape there.
So he still obviously has not gotten the motorcycle bug out of his system. And in fact, then his first car.
Oh yes,
the Austin Healey.
Yeah, I had the Austin Healey, but of course I wanted to. Once you get one of those early British sports cars, MG, Triumphs, Healey, you want to go further if you're a car guy. Well, I wanted to go further. A lot of people wound up with Jaguars. Well, I had this really nice, I missed this car. It was a 4.2 E-Type Jag, British Racing Green Roadster. Yeah, it was a good car. I got job transferred to New York. I was living in Sacramento at the time, and streets of New York were going to beat that car apart. And so I sold it, but I kept the motorcycle. That's my mother, by the way. My mother liked to get rides in the car. Wish Mom were still around, but like a lot of our moms, she's no longer with us. But she did live to be 96, and I miss her a lot. And the car in the background was our driver. That was the Olds F-85. That's a great little car. It's a compact car with a room and V8. I thought it was a great car. General Motors stopped making those and made bigger 442s and things like that.
What year approximately was this that you bought the E-Type?
The E-Type, it was a 65. I bought it in 67.
Okay, so
2 years old. And it was like brand new because somebody had bought it, couldn't keep up with the payments, and so I wound up bought it. It's a great car. And I never had trouble with the Prince of Darkness, you know, you say the but I never had a problem with that car. I drove it all over the place, drove it to work every day.
So now finally we're going to get down to business. That
Yeah.
is Ferrari number 1.
Yes. And the reason I wanted this car so badly is I had seen the Lusso for the first time in the 1962 issue of Road and Track. It was a pre-production photo of the prototype, and you can see it sitting in front of the bumper there. I put that magazine and the pictures of the Lusso in front of the car when I first showed it. Yes, I finally got my Ferrari, and gosh, I put out the word that I was looking for a Ferrari Lusso. Roland Lusso, and one of my car friends called one day. He said, well, I know you're looking for a Lusso. You know, they got one over at the dealership, San Francisco Ferrari. And I went over and looked at it, and I saw it. That's the one. It's the color I like, the dark maroon, black upholstery. Great car. Gotta have it.
So then his thirst was whetted, I guess you'd say, and then that's car number 2, for God's sake.
Yeah. Well, that first car, that picture was taken at Hillsborough. The first time I showed the car was 1976 at Hillsborough. And that led to me getting involved in judging, which I'll tell you about shortly. But no, you get the Ferrari fever, right? I remember saying to Sherry, I finally got my Lusso, and this is it. I don't need anything else. Well, the problem is that all the Ferraris back in those days looked different. And so all of a sudden you'd see something like this, and I said, oh wow, that doesn't look at all like the Lusso, but that's a pretty cool car.
And it didn't look like this when you got it, didn't it?
No, I bought it in pieces. It was all apart. It was in Coconut Grove, Florida, in somebody's garage who had started. He took it all apart, and he was going to restore it, and he never got around to it. So he finally put it up for sale. Now, the interesting thing about this car, and so I flew over there. You didn't have the transports that you do today. I mean, if that was happening today, you'd call it Passport or Reliable or one of the car haulers and have them do it. You didn't have all that. So I flew over to Florida. I rented a Ryder one-way truck, loaded the pieces of that car up and drove it all the way back to California. And when Sherry saw that car all in pieces, you bought that.
And you were in the same house that you're in now, right?
Yes, we've been in that same house for 50 years.
So many of you have been there, but down in that basement came these boxes of parts.
Right.
And then, I don't know, how long did it take you to...
Oh gosh, it was 2 or 3 years to get all that together. Even the engine was totally apart. I tried to ensure that all the pieces were there, and fortunately they were, but it was totally apart.
So he's doing this himself, and so if that wasn't enough, he then...
Oh, well then the next thing comes along. And I hear that somebody in the Northeast, Joe Finn, you ever heard the name Joe Finn? He's the one that wrote the book on the Ferrari Testarossa. And he had about 5 Testarossas, plus a bunch of the guys. And he was working for IBM, fairly high position, and he had the car fever, and he had quite a large collection of cars. And so I went over there to see his collection. And sitting at the back was this Barchetta. Well, I knew about Barchettas, and I knew they were very historic, and that's the car that put Ferrari on the map.
How many of these were built?
Well, what happened is that I saw that car and I said, "Is that your car, Joe?" He said, "No, that belongs to the guy that restores my cars. His name's Bob Taylor." I said, Larry Taylor. No, Bob Taylor. That's a whole story in itself. I got lots of good stories. I wish I could tell them. How am I doing here, Mike?
You gotta move along.
Gotta move along. Anyway, I wound up with that Barchetta, which I dearly love, and got hooked on it. And then Cooper Weeks, who also had a 166 story Barchetta, we decided that we would have an international reunion tour, 1,000-mile tour for the Barchettas. And it was one of the first reunions of that type to take place. I think the only other one had been the first reunion of the GPOs, which took place in France. And so we decided to do it, and we had like 10 Barchettas, and we had them out for a whole week. We went 1,000 miles in. Oh, it's great. The whole story unto itself. Well, with my camera, I couldn't get them all in. Get 7 of them there, and the 7th one there is our car. So I wanted to have our car in the photo. There's a couple more on there.
And so you're way down in the rabbit hole at this point with Ferraris. And
Oh, yes.
we weren't done yet.
Well, yes, and then I see a 275 GT. And I said, well, that's the car that succeeded the Lusso. And it looks entirely different. And it drives different, it feels different, it's got a lot more power. Great handling car, one of the best handling vintage Ferraris. So we wound up buying that and drove it all over the darn place. I remember driving it to Phoenix for some event, and we're out there in the middle of nowhere on, I was 10, I guess it was, and all of a sudden I hear this voice, slow down, look after the damn California Highway Patrol plane, right down on us. And so I said, well, crap. I was going about 140 at the time. Nobody around, right? Why not? I loved it. But I knew that they would radio, the patrol cars did, so I said to Sherry, well, crap, we're going to have to slow down and talk it. And sure enough, we did see patrol cars ahead, but we didn't get stopped for speeding.
So you would think with cars that look like this and entering Concord and so forth, that Ed was a pretty straight-laced guy and a member of society and not a threat. And yet, he had never given up on his motorcycle roots.
Right.
And in fact, I think you had probably, my theory is you had this photo in your bedroom.
Well, that's 1953. I was in high school, and I had that Bob Knucklehead, and saw Marlon Brando in the Wild One before he got fat and lazy. And I thought, man, that guy really looks cool. The only problem is he's on a Triumph, but that's okay. He looks cool. I want to be like him.
Right, and then this guy?
James Dean. And I see James Dean, I thought, oh wow, now there's a really cool guy.
Right.
And I thought he was so cool that when I saw Rebel Without a Cause, I wound up getting a red jacket just like his. I wound up growing my hair just like his. And I tried to, usually had a cigarette dangling out of my mouth, trying to, slouch down like he did. And so I had really liked James Dean and Marlon Brando. But I did this for Fred Johansson, because another guy that was in the Wild One in 1953 was Lee Marvin. That was the first movie that he was in. And his character was called Gino in the Wild One. And he's on an Indian Fred. Fred, he's got a big collection of Indian motorcycles. So I put that in there just for you.
So with all those idols, I guess you'd say,
Yeah.
Ed then ends up looking like
Oh,
that.
that's what I pretty much looked at my peak. And that's a picture that's on the wall over at the candy store. And a lot of people know who that is now, but you got a lot of distinguished people.
This photo was not used in his application to become a Pebble Beach judge.
And so for a while, and it's still done periodically, one of the candy store members, somebody you know, would come and say, come on over this wall. You know who that is? You don't know who that is. Well, it's me. And that was taken at the end of a run down the mountain, and he stopped, and one of the club members just took a shot and came out pretty good. And we all had a handle, and I'm Easy Ed. And the reason it's called Easy is anytime anybody would want to do anything, good, bad, or different, they'd say, hey, I'm Easy, let's roll them. So I became Easy. This is, I'm still running Harleys. That's a 94 FXR, which is a great bike. That was taken when Sonny Barger, president of the Oakland Hells Angels, was released from Union State Prison. And when he came out of prison, we all gathered up in the Altamont Hills at the Mountain House, a biker bar up there. And they invited clubs from all over, including our club. And that's our club bikes. As you see, they were all stripped down. We didn't run saddlebags and windshields and all that stuff. Usually, often without front fenders. Anyway, we're going to talk about the club, but that's the club bikes with that me sitting there. And at that point, I'm 59.
That means everybody can go. Let's talk about why, in fact, he's not dead right now. He went the straight, or he had a side of foot in the world of being a regular guy. And she's sitting right over here.
Yeah, she is sitting right. No, that's how sure he looked when I first met her. And I wasn't really looking to get serious with anybody. I had a number of girlfriends, you know. Funny about gals, they like to go after the bad guys, right? And I guess I was conceived as a bad guy in a motorcycle club or game or whatever they call them. And so I met Sherry, and it was at a house party that a friend of mine held. And he invited a number of people that I knew. And when I arrived, they were all with their wife or significant other, girlfriend. And Sherry and I were the only two that were by ourselves, so we wound up talking to each other.
And so later that week,
I didn't really quite that soon. No, the story is that I'm in Sacramento. I met Sherry. I'm not looking for another girlfriend. I got plenty of girlfriends. I'm that guy, right? They love the bad guys. And so I take Sherry. I get job transferred to New York City. That's why I sold the Jag, kept the motorcycle. And I take Sherry out for a nice dinner, farewell dinner. And we're talking away, and she leans across the table with those big brown eyes, and she said, Ed, I got something to tell you. I said, really, what's that? She said, I'm going with you. What do you mean you're going with me? She took a big risk, but we're still together.
It worked. She's still sticking around, in spite of what all of us tell her. She's stuck with him.
You stuck with him?
And so to continue the theme of his alternate life, these are his fellow club members, for God's sake.
Well, I like the Hells Angels, because the Hells Angels are the number one. And when I get involved with something, I like to keep moving until I reach the top. Well, if you're going to be in the MC world, not the Weekend Warriors, you know, the MC clubs, the Hells Angels are top of the heap. And I like the life, quite frankly. And people say, well, what in the world would you want to be involved with that crowd? It's because of adrenaline. They're living on the edge of the way those guys run, and you're just pushing them. And keep getting dangerous life. And I became what's called a hanger-on. They have 3 levels, like the motorcycle games. You have a hanger-on where you just, they kind of see you, they get to know you. They have a prospect. You don't ask them, they ask you. You've been hanging around and they think you're an okay guy and might be a good member someday. They'll invite you to be a prospect. You go through prospecting, which is not real good duty. You're going to do whatever they ask you to do, period. And they ask you to do a lot of dirty work and clean up the place and get them a beer and go to the store and get you this, get you that. You just order you around and that's done. You see how loyal you're going to be. And then prospecting can last quite a while. It can last year, 2, 3 years before they take a vote. And when they take a vote, it has to be unanimous, or you don't get in. And sometimes they say, "You haven't been accepted, and by the way, leave your bike here. Go, don't want you."
So maybe tell the story of how you sort of broke the ice between the motorcycle world and the car world. He's showing cars at the same time he's looking like this.
Yeah, well, what I did is you get into Hell's Angels, it's 24/7. And you really, once you're in, you're not going to get out. And there are some Hell's Angels who are no longer active and they can leave. But they're going to come around and they're going to ask you for a favor. They're going to ask you to hang on to a drug shipment. Somebody will buy it, pick it up tomorrow. We got half a dozen brothers coming from the East Coast and want you to put them up for a week. You got to do some business. You got a few acres out in the middle of nowhere. We'll take care of business out there. And find some dead bodies sometimes. I could tell you stories there too. Anyway, I decided I didn't want to do it 24/7. I didn't want to turn over my entire life. So I decided I would form a club, an MC club. That would need, and it needs to be approved by them. And so this was a group of people I was riding with before I formed the club. When I formed the club, the Iron Monks, quite a few of them became Iron Monks, and you can see me, Iron Monk, in the upper left-hand corner there. That's me at the time. Anyway, it was a good group, and that group is still going all these years later.
And keep in mind, he's sort of straightening himself out on the weekends and showing his Ferraris.
He's moving. See, I want to tell all kinds of stories. He moves me along. Thank you, Mike. That was our logo, the Iron Monks MC that you just flashed by. And of course, when I became the president of the club, you want to be able to make your mark as the president of an MC club. And so you began to grow some pretty scraggly hair. There I'm growing a beard. I looked that way for a while. And I put this in there for you, Fred, because Fred is a pioneer member of the San Francisco Motorcycle Club. And they recently had an event. I was trying to remember, was that a celebration of the 75th anniversary, Fred?
Most likely.
Yeah. Anyway, Fred is no longer active, but he was a long-standing active member of that club. So when they decided to celebrate their 75th, Fred came and he helped put that event together. They invited the other clubs. A couple of the Hells Angels showed up. And so I don't try and take, some of those guys don't like pictures of me taken, some of them are okay. I don't get my pets. This guy walked out, turned his back, I got his colors. And so anyway, Fred put together a heck of an event. You guys did a great job. That was a great day. They had motorcycles parked all the way up and down Wilson Street. A lot of the clubs were there. I was representing the Iron Monks. There were a couple of Hells Angels there. There were representatives of several other clubs. That was great. I really enjoyed that. I think we did too.
So we're back to his car world. He's showing cars.
Yes.
He's making up rules for judging cars.
Yeah.
He's getting into the thick of it in terms of how Concours work. And this was, so in that process, look, he shaved his beard off.
Yeah. Well, what happened is that I got involved in judging, never expected to. When I showed my first car at Hillsborough, judging was very subjective. There was no standardization or consistency, very all over the place. Something's got to be done. People said, yeah, something's got to be done, why don't you do it? And that's how I got involved in judging, kind of took over my life, went all the way up to being a long-time chief judge of Pebble Beach. Like I said, I like to keep working until I get to the top. Anyway, I'm judging, this is a few years before I became chief judge of Pebble Beach, but I'm judging, and I'm judging at Palo Alto, where it used to be held over at the Stanford soccer field, I guess it was. And Gil Fitz, who used to be part of this group, in fact, he was at the lunch fund for a while, and unfortunately he's no longer with us. But Gil called me up and he said, I understand you ride motorcycles. I said, yeah, I do some motorcycling. And he said, I want to put together a motorcycle class for Palo Alto, but I don't want the ordinary motorcycles. I want the chopper motorcycles. And I gave a few plays. I told him, talk to Arlen Bass, talk to a couple other guys who were bike builders in the area, which he did. And so I show up, coat and tie, credentials and all that. And Sherry and I are walking down toward where the judges' meeting is going to be held. And you see the motorcycles off to the left up there. I said, oh, I'm going to go over there and see what they came up with. And I get about 20 paces from that motorcycle class, and here comes the president of Hell's Angels. And he gets, Sherry was there, he gets about as far as that wall over there, and he gets down and he says, is that you? Is that really you? What in the hell are you doing with that? Get up. He had never seen me on anything but a motorcycle, and he'd never seen me on anything biker gear. So I kept the car world and the biker world very separate. And so we chat a little bit, and he says, I didn't know you were interested in citizens and their cages. That's what we call the citizens. Everybody's a citizen, and their cars are their cages, right? And so I said, well, yeah, I have a little interest. He says, shakes his head, and he says, well, I'll be goddamn. And he walks off. And so at that point, they were beginning to get clash. And the car world is much different than the biker world, particularly the MC clubs and spread knows. And so I felt I had to make a decision. And so Sherry was scared to death I was going to stay in the biker world, because I really liked it, despite the danger and living on the edge of the law and all that sort of thing. I kind of fit in. In fact, I fit in so well, and I wasn't a member, as I said. I'd go to the Hell's Angels clubhouse over there in Pennsylvania Avenue in San Francisco. It's still there, and the prospects are there. They've got to keep the place neat, cleaned up, and do everybody's bidding. And so I'd walk in, and I guess I looked the part, because prospect would come in and say, hello, boss, can I get you anything, boss? I said, I'm not a member. They say, yes, boss, because they're being tested all the time, and you don't want to hit their bets. So I guess I had to look at the swagger. And so anyway, to Sherry's relief, I decided I would stay with the car world. I continued to ride motorcycles.
And that's what happened to Ed. Once a crowd.
Flip the previous one more time.
Yeah.
And so here's one of the last pictures taken of me is a real biker. I had decided to stay in the car world. I'd taken off my beard, but I still look pretty imposing, I guess. And of course, what you try and do. I was 6'2", I weighed 220, I wore combat boots, maybe another inch, so I'm a pretty thick guy. I'm carrying a loaded 9mm Beretta. I have a 7-inch blade up my sleeve. I have a boot knife. I have And lots of gear on that motorcycle, which Richard Deal owns that bike too. But that's one of the last pictures taken before I
Are you carrying
up my act. And a short time later, they're sharing I on the ramp at Pebble Beach. And when one of the biker guys saw that, he said, "You look like a damn putz." And I still had the swagger look, and I said, "What did you say?" I said, "You look different." I said, "I thought that's what you said." Now, why do you get offended by somebody calling you a putz? That's a contraction of two words. The first two letters represent a female term.
Let's move on.
The last two letters are putz. Anyway, here we go.
Okay, so now, since he has made his decision that he will come clean, literally and figuratively, in the car world, this is what he has done. The kickoff to his sort of judging rise to the top of the heap was the 1984 event at Monterey. Some of you have probably been there. It was a huge event that Ed put together because they knew you in the Ferrari Club, right? And that was wildly successful. And the subsequent, Ed, why don't you go over the chain of events following that?
Well, that was the first time that I had a chance to introduce the judging forms and judging guidelines that I developed for the Bay Area Ferrari Group, introduced them nationally, and that was a big event. Like you said, over 200 cars. At that point, it was the biggest Ferrari gathering held. I got a personal letter of congratulations from Enzo Ferrari, which I still have, guarding against the fading purple ink. Then the Ferrari Club of America, which was a big national club, they invited me to come and help with their national meet in '85, and then they said they would like me to be their first permanent designated chief judge. So I was chief judge for the Ferrari Club of America for over 20 years. When the Palm Beach Cavallino Classic was established in '92, they came to me, and so I set up the judging, who was chief judge at the Cavallino Classic, again for over 20 years. In '85, that was just the next year after that big event we put, Sherry and I put together. She did a lot of work on that too. Pebble Beach invited me to be chief class judge for the Ferraris at Pebble Beach, and I was chief class judge for the Ferraris there for 15 years. And then in 1999, they appointed me chief judge for the whole show, and where I was handling the judging for another 15 years. And then I went to the chairman, Sandra Button, and said 30 years of handling the judging at Pebble Beach is enough for anyone. I'm ready to retire. And as you can see that, I did that along the way. I never, once I reach my objectives, I start looking for something else. I don't hold on to a position because of the title or the recognition. I've done what I came to do. It's time to move on and make room for somebody else. So I've always done that. So I've been retired from as chief judge. My last year was 2013, which was a transition year with the current chief judge, who's Chris Bach. He had been head judge for the Classic Car Club of America. He's one of my best chief class judges. So he knows what he's doing for sure. So I've been retired a couple of years, and I said, okay, I've taken my Ferrari forms and guidelines, which I've built for the Ferrari world. I've used them other places for other marks. When I became chief judge at Pebble Beach, I took those same forms and procedures and implemented them across all the classes at Pebble Beach, where they're still using these. They really haven't changed them at all. And of course, once I was out of there, they could have. But everything's the same. They're time tested. I developed them decades ago. And they're kind enough to invite me to be an honorary judge in their emeritus each year. And in 2015, I said, well, we've spread these forms and guidelines and procedures across the United States and Canada. I think we can take it further than that. So I formed a group in 2015 called the International Chief Judge Advisory Group, ICJ. As my charter members, I picked what I consider the best chief judges in the world. I've been to shows in Europe. I've been around a long time. I know who could do the job. And put together this group, which is running full bore. Nigel Matthews succeeded me, and now John Carlson is the chairman and doing a great job.
That was a news. Let me just say that a lot of people recognize the significant impact that Ed has had on the world of judging, for goodness sake, and this list I think proves that. And not the least of which were his local pals, the local Ferrari Club, and they cooked up together, I don't remember what year, a bronze bust. And this looks like a guy who signed the Constitution, doesn't it?
Well, that was a total shock. And as I said, I retired as the chief judge for the Ferrari Club of America after 20 years. And the national meet that year was held in Monterey. And so, as usual, we'd done it for years, Sherry and I would get up on the stage and I would announce the awards and Sherry would hand off the trophies. And so we got 1,200 people sitting there, big crowd, and we get ready to get up there and start announcing the awards. And the president of the club said, hold on a minute, we got something we want you to take a look at. And they roll out this little table and it's got something on it with a cloth over it. And they said, maybe some of you were there, but so I take off the cloth and oh my God, it was me. So I was speechless. And you can see that's rare for me to be speechless. And so I was really hesitant. I really was. I said, I thought you had to be dead to get something like this. Well, what they had done is they had hired a sculptress that's pretty darn good over in Murray County. They had given her photographs, and from those photographs, she had done this, and probably looking like me when I was maybe in my 40s, maybe 50. I had my motorcycle jacket on, but instead of my Iron Monk's pin on the collar there, they replaced it with a Scooter Ferrari badge. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then they had some nice words to say that Ferraris are meant to be driven. That award is still given each year in my name, because Ferraris are meant to be driven, and so the people that get that are the people that get out and really ride the Ferrari. Kevin Enderby has won that award. He's got hundreds of thousands of miles on his Ferraris. And so anyway, that sits at the top of our stairway. We call him Little Ed. And there's a second one, and that's the club trophy. And so each year, the winner of that, there's a little plaque with her name on it. It gets tacked onto it. It's got a bigger base, so the whole more plaques. But anyway, I guess I got some pretty good and speechless recognition. In fact, I was so speechless that I get up there and I'm going to announce. All of a sudden, I heard Sherry. I said, Sherry, for the first time, I hand her the mic. And she announced a couple of the awards until I got my senses back. That's how surprised I was. They're still shocked and I guess honored that they would do something like that.
It was quite an honor. We just wanted to, I don't know, sort of prove to people that you actually worked during your career.
Yes, that's me judging the Pebble.
Yeah, instead of just ordering people around.
Right. Yeah, I actually did a lot of judging before I did cheap paper, for sure. And there's the forum. That's the forum I developed here in the Bay Area in the late 70s. It's the forum that was taken nationally in 1984. And all these decades later, I guess I did a pretty good job, because that's as used today. This is 2022, and they haven't changed it at all.
I would tell you that this is a form of mine. Yeah, but the competition in the Concord world at this point, I would be surprised if we had any cars in any class that I've judged less than 97 points, and somebody has to win this thing. Well, elegance down there, the things that are circled, that's the secret. We've got 3 points that we can spread around on a subjective basis. So we still get some subjectivity involved in it. And that elegance factor is probably the winner, the thing that makes you a winner in 5 out of 6 classes.
Well, I tell you, we had to do something like that, because when I first became chief judge, there was straight 100 points. Well, things get so competitive at Pebble Beach that we'll have as many as 4 100-point cars. We have first, second, and third. So there'll be a 100-point car that doesn't get an award. And in order to break those ties in close scoring situations, my judges had to keep looking and looking and looking until they found something to break the tie. And sometimes that got to be something as simple as a wrong hose clamp or an incorrect finish, on an airbox or something. Well, that almost becomes counterproductive. So what I did is I added this what we call additional factor, where if you have close scores like that, rather than trying to pick fly specks out of the pepper, you actually have an allowed bonus that you can give for elegance, presence, or provenance. And the reason that we use that, the reason I added that, is because those are the kind of things you look at when you go to select best of show. And every class winner is a best of show candidate.
Some of you read Cavallino, that's a Ferrari magazine. And there was a write-up in a recent one, road test, not a road test, a feature of a Barchetta, just the way it looked just like Ed's, but it had belonged to Bob Lee. And Bob Lee had this huge collection in Reno. His wife has kept it, and she actively participates. But in this article, she quotes Bob as having told her, I will quote, "Ferrari judges at Pebble Beach would rather eat their children than give 100 points."
It's pretty serious now.
Yeah.
Let's get serious.
Let's flip on here. This is a cast of thousands that comes to see Ed.
When we started going, this was our 49th year at Pebble Beach. Great years, either a spectator, an entrant, or a judge. It was my 42nd year as a judge. And when we were going down there in the 70s, it was almost like a club event. If you got there early enough, you could park right in front of the lodge. I remember Sherry and I rode the motorcycle down. We parked right in front of the lodge. Well, you can't get even near. You get sent out to some distant parking area or something. The judges have a lot closer in. But, and it wasn't near that crowded. But that's a recent picture of what it looks like.
I think it was like 15,000 people rolled through there in a day. It's just remarkable. And speaking of Sherry, this is a great picture of Sherry. This is, as you have heard, the power behind the throne.
Yeah, did you take that by any chance, Mike?
We might have.
Not sure who took that.
Yeah.
But no, Sherry, I couldn't have done this without Sherry, and I mean that very sincerely. I mean, I'm out front, you know, making decisions and turning people around, but she handles all the behind-the-scenes paperwork, and that's a great assist to me. And that's her in the judge's room at Pebble Beach, and she's got a stack of judging forms and class assignments there that she's walking around to the different judging teams. And she also helped with getting the results in on time, and she was so serious about the results being provided on time that she became known as the Wicked Witch of the North. But no, we've been together, what, 56 years now? And we were together 3 years before we got married, so we've been together almost 60 years, and I still love her dearly.
We've got one more photo.
Oh, one more. Oh, there's when I retired.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's me on the ramp at Pebble Beach, and that's the chairman, Sandra Button. And they came up with a very nice glass gavel mounted in that beautiful case, which we have in our living room at our home in San Francisco. And there I am giving them thumbs up. And no, it's been a great journey. Lots of ups and downs, lots of stories were left out in the interest of time. I was so tempted, I'm so happy. I'd only be halfway through what we did here. But there's lots of great stories. And
Here's one more picture. That's a great one.
oh yes,
It's gone full circle. Remember way back in North Dakota, there was an old car. This is probably what you wanted to have.
that's the car I wanted to have back in the 50s, and wound up with that flat valve 44. Now 44 makes a good vintage hot rod, but the Deuce is the icon, and I always wanted to have a Deuce. Well, when the pandemic came along, we all had a lot of time to think. And I had a dozen cars and motorcycles, and I had lots of other cars along the way. And I'm now in my 80s, and I said to Sherry, I don't think she believed me. I said, Sherry, this is getting to be a job because I like to get out and drive my car. So if you have a dozen vehicles, just to get out and exercise them. And then I do all my own work. It's more difficult to jack up the car and get down on the concrete and, jump up real quick. So I said, I'm going to sell all of them at once. It's time for them to go on to do custodians. And I had some great cars. And I proceeded to do that. I sold the motorcycles. Richard Deal has 2 of them. And I'm really happy he has 2 of them. He has a serious motorcycle collection, and I know they have a good home and they'll be very well taken care of. And some of them were similar. All of them sold quite well. I've been around a long time, and everybody knows that my cars and motorcycles are in very good shape. I got down to 3, and they were all different. I loved them all. I had my Ferrari 355 Fiorano Spider. Great car, one of the best balance and sounding Ferraris around. I had a Shelby 427 Cobra. Love that car. Sure you named that one Johnny Be Good. Bad boy rock and roll car for sure. And I had the Deuce. And a lot of people didn't even know I had this Deuce. But I had it for a number of years. I've always liked hot rods.
And it did okay show. Tell them that.
Yeah, anyway, the Deuce won. And that's the car I have. I've had it out here a number of times. A lot of you people have seen it. But no, I never intended to show that car. It was invited to Pebble Beach for the 90th year anniversary of the Deuce that they had in 2022. And I didn't expect that they'd come after me. They had Ken Gross and Bruce Meyer, Roy Brizio, the real gurus in hot rod were looking for the best Deuces in the country. And Ken Gross called me up and he said, "You're going to enter your Deuce?" I said, "You guys are looking for the best deuces in the country. They said, well, you got a pretty darn good deuce. I think you ought to give it a try. And the class was oversubscribed. I didn't have any conflict. I'd already been retired as a judge for years. And lo and behold, it was selected. So there it is on the lawn at Pebble Beach. And they put a nice placard in the back there.
How did it do?
Well, it was basically exhibit at Pebble.
Oh, that was smart.
And then the good guys, I think some of you are aware that the good guys put on great hot rod shows all over the country. They came up to me and they said, you got a great deuce. We're going to celebrate the 90th anniversary of the deuce also at our West Coast Nationals, and we'd like to have your car. So it went from Pebble to the West Coast Nationals as the good guys, and they had selected 30 from around the country, and was inside and guarded and treated well. We was there for 3 days. And then somebody said, well, gosh, you're going to go to Pomona. I said, you mean the Grand National Roaster Show? They got the best rods in the country down there. You know, you got pretty good rods. It's been Pebble, it's been here. You ought to give it a try. So I thought about it and applied to Pomona. Didn't know if I'd be accepted or not. I mean, you could rate a hot rod in Pomona. They have thousands of them, but you know, you park outside, you park where you find a place. I wanted to be inside if I selected in for judging. And so it was selected. You know, 3 weeks later, congratulations, your goose has been selected for indoor judging. And we get down there, we walked in there and Sherry says, oh my God, look at those hot rods. I said, yeah, we're lucky just to be here. And so come Sunday, where they start announcing the awards, and you have to have the panels open for judging all 3 days. They got them roped off. You're not allowed to get in and touch your car because only the judges get there. And they can come any time of the day. So we're sitting there. Better get over the hall early so we get some seats. So we're sitting there and they get to the deuces. And they announce the 3rd place. I said, that's a great car right across the aisle from us. They deserve some. They announced the 2nd place, and that was a couple of cars down to the aisle from us, another great deuce. And then it was either Sherry that said it first or I said it first, leaned over and I said, we're lucky just to be here. And then they announced that our car won first. And I didn't know what to do. I was, again, rarely speechless. And the guy in front of us, he turned around and he said, hey, you won first. They want you up on the stage. That was a big day, man. When you first at Pomona, that's like when you first at Pebble Beach. It's really a big deal. And I have a big smile.
Let's give this guy a big hand.
Just have one quick thing. Then they have something called Deuce Days up in Victoria, British Columbia. It's one of the biggest deuce gatherings anywhere. And we've been up there a couple of times, not with the car. So we decided to take the car up there and just happy to be there in hot rod heaven. And they gave out an award for the best historic period deuce. There were 1,200 eligible. We got number 1. Wow. So Willie's a pretty good car, and they announced up at the Victoria when you got the award, they said, make sure you see this car. It's one of the best hot rods in North America. So our little car got a long way. Sherry said, it's gone to the top end. You don't need to show it again.
Ed will be happy to chat if you come up here, but we're going to say excuse everybody. Thank you for coming.
We'll,
this guy is pretty cool.
Hope I didn't take too long.